Welcome back to Medical Experts in Football. I'm Taiwo Adeshigbin, your host. So you know how usually it takes 4 years to get a bachelor's degree? Well, no one told this sports scientist it would take her another 4 years to get her first full-time job. But let me tell you, she hit the jackpot with her first job. Just hang tight and hear her journey. I welcome you, Christi Edson, the sports scientist for Orlando Pride, a women's professional soccer team in the NWSL League. Prior to that, she worked with Orlando City's sports performance department. Before I talk about your role as a sports scientist, I'm curious, did you grow up in Titusville, Florida?
Yeah, Space Coast.
Wow. Yeah. So that's one of the cities where rockets launch. Have you seen one launch into space before?
Oh, yes. Rockets, shuttles, they wake you up when they come back. Yeah, I've seen it all over the 20 some years I've been there.
What's the experience like for those that have never seen it before?
It's definitely a sight. So I would say if you haven't, you have to one time see a rocket launch. Night launches are something spectacular because they light up the sky and it's pitch black, but then all of a sudden it looks like the sun is rising very fast.
Wow.
So it's a sight for sure.
Do you need to go somewhere or can you literally see it happening from your house?
Yeah, I can walk out onto the driveway, see it once it clears the trees and watch it for a long time. So not very far. Obviously a coastal view is a little bit better, but I can see them from the house.
Well, let's go on to sports because I saw that you grew up playing basketball. Did you play any other sports?
Played a little golf as well, but basketball was definitely the main one. A little bit of catcher when I was little, but mostly basketball. And then I did athletic training in high school.
So what's so cool about basketball? This is a soccer podcast, so I need to get your thoughts.
I know. My friends played it. I wish I had a cool story, but my friends played it and I liked that it wasn't a lot of running. It's a much shorter sport than soccer is. So I preferred basketball.
Yeah, that's so interesting you say that because I played basketball in high school and just the thought of all the elbows knocking into me was just too much. So I really dislike organized basketball playing it, but I love watching it. Well, what led you to even now working for a soccer team? I mean, it is the best sport in the world. I know you haven't heard that before, so.
Oh, I definitely think so as well. And even from a science perspective, it's more interesting than any other sport for me because you have the endurance piece, you have the power piece. So it's way more intriguing than for me to say golf from a science point, and that's just my opinion. I really got into watching soccer football in 2014, I think, right in my college years. And when the opportunity came up to join Orlando City at the time as an internship, I was like, I'll do whatever just to be around the club. So it was just kind of a perfect little fit.
And we're going to talk about Orlando City because reading and listening to some of the podcasts about you, I was like, this girl is kind of crazy, and we're going to get to that. But before we do that, what's a misconception you think people have about exercise science and high performance?
Probably that it's perfectly periodized. And when you have 30 individuals, the biggest thing that I've learned most recently is the periodization that we learned in school does not directly perfectly fit into a real world scenario. So you really have to get to know individuals and get to know the human and work around that. And that's just not something that I learned in school. It was block periodization, undulating periodization, and it's going to work perfectly throughout the season. And that's just not the case. So you have to have a little flex and bend in there.
And now for some listeners, because there are going to be some that may not be too familiar with the periodization, knowing when an athlete peaks, can you just describe that, what you mean by that?
Yeah, so we would hope that we build in preseason and maintain. Obviously, it's very hard to maintain for 9 months. That's not realistic in terms of physicality. You have to continually peak and continually push throughout the season so that way you have progress and build. Otherwise, the body won't continue to adapt. So you hope to continue peaking and throughout the regular season. And then when you get to playoffs, you taper off a little bit and hope that everyone is still fresh and healthy, even though you keep the intensities high going into playoffs.
Now, you said that you have to kind of get to know the players. How do you, especially knowing now you manage so many players, how do you actually make that time, or what are things you do to get to know your players?
I think it happens in the gym for me, honestly. That's the time where I have the most one-on-one time with them. There's not other distractions. So you can joke around, you can, find out their ticks. Obviously, we have a lot of travel as well. So some travel trips, I might be sitting next to a player. We just came back from Seattle. So I could have randomly been assigned a seat next to a player for 6 hours. Like, that's a perfect time to strike up a conversation for a little bit. So you pick your moments, and obviously you don't want to push the issue, but there's definitely natural times when you can get to know a player.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to periodization, I think there also needs to be a balance for sports scientists, not getting too overwhelmed with all of the tasks at hand. How do you kind of balance that life as well as kind of your social life? You've been married for a year. How do you make that balance?
I'm pretty good about shutting it off when I get home, and I shut off really hard. So during an off day, like, I don't want to see my phone, and that just comes naturally to me. I know that's not for other people, but when I'm home, it's like I'm a completely different person. So it switches for me pretty easily. Sometimes it's hard not to pick up the computer, because I do love getting on the computer and working in the GPS or the force plate data. But a lot of times you're mostly tired, and you don't get a lot of time at home, so you take advantage of it.
It's clear that you are very passionate about this job, because I think, and this is just my opinion, I think sports scientists, it sounds so cool, but few people really understand the challenges. I mean, you obtained your bachelor's, you graduated in 2014. You didn't get your first job until 2018. First, tell me, how did you stay motivated to even continue applying for jobs and keep those skills up that you haven't even got to get going?
Yeah, it was a lot of working with youth athletes. I did the personal training route just to make some money. I did unpaid internships. I moved for unpaid internships. In all full honesty, you get to a point 4 years later where you go, okay, what do I need to start thinking about as a backup, because this isn't working and I need to start making money at some point. But the nutrition internship with Orlando City fell open and it worked, and I loved it so much that I had already decided I would go back for another year unpaid if they asked me. Thankfully, I got hired on, so I didn't have to do that, but it definitely is very hard, and you just keep grinding. Now, I can't say if it would have worked out different, maybe another year or two without having that first real break, maybe I would have changed careers or positions at that point.
You said that opportunity came about. Did you just notice it online? Did a friend say, hey, there's an intern position available? How did that come about?
It was, I came across a website called Teamworks Online. Never heard of it before, but that is where all the sports jobs are. So if someone listening to this podcast have never heard of that website, that is where sports post their internships. That is where sports clubs post their jobs. I do understand that some of the higher positions are probably already filled, right? That it's kind of who you know when you get to those higher positions. But those entry-level jobs, Teamworks Online was a huge eye-opener for me.
You said when you got there, you really loved it, that you would have worked even another year for free. What did you like about that position or the whole atmosphere?
I've always liked the behind the scenes stuff. So I did the athletic training stuff in high school, and that was behind the scenes sports. And even when you're playing basketball and you're like, well, I want to try to go to college and play basketball. I loved being behind the scenes. I didn't want to go to college and play basketball. I wanted to go to college and figure out how to be on the sideline and working with the team rather than being on the team.
This intern, was it paid or was it completely
unpaid? I drove an hour every day to get there and an hour home, and spent 6-7 hours just hanging out, doing the work, and then figuring out how to stay around the building.
So where did your income come from? Because not many graduates are looking to do an intern. They have to pay for loans. They have to take care of themselves. Did you work other jobs, do athletic training?
I did a little bit of the personal training. So I had some stuff saved up. My parents were very gracious, and I can't underestimate that privilege that I had for that. But I was going to college at the same time for grad school. So I was doing school in the evenings and then doing the internship during the day. So yeah, I wasn't having income, but I was definitely busy, like a grad assistantship or something where you're busy 24/7.
And about that internship, what type of things were you able to do or learn the skills that you learned during
Yeah,
that
it was
experience?
mostly a nutrition performance internship. So a lot of shakes and body compositions and hydration tests. That was the main focus. I got in with the strength coach and was able to ask questions about GPS and, hey, like my background is actually strength conditioning. So can I talk with you sometimes when I've finished all my nutrition duties? Can I just come hang out in the gym? The team here at the time was very open to, like, they loved answering questions. I think that interns sometimes get scared or hesitant to ask questions to the staff that are here, but we love talking about the industry. So if you ask us a question, like, we're going to jump all over answering and go on a rant probably. So that was something that I had available to me to ask other people in sports science or in strength conditioning, in athletic training as well, just
Mhm.
random questions.
So during your time there, it's clear that you did something right to then obtain a position a year later. What do you think about you helped you finally get that foot in the door, get that first paid job?
I think the big thing was just that I was there. So there were other interns that were kind of in my internship class, if you want to say, but they had classes 3 times a week. So they could only come to the internship 2 times a week, whereas I was there every single day that there was training. So that was just like, again, a privilege of being in grad school and having night classes or online classes that I could do on my own.
Mhm.
The other thing that I've like really noticed is be consistent. If this is a task that you are supposed to do, you should be able to do it without asking and do it correctly every single time. So I became reliable in where they treated me as staff, even though I was an intern.
Now, looking back, do you wish you completed your master's degree earlier in your career? Do you think that had an impact on you getting that first job?
I think so. I really do. The industry is definitely moving to higher degrees, and I wish I would have started that earlier. I started it at UCF, but decided to switch to online, which gave me an opportunity to be somewhere and to move
Mhm.
anywhere. So I didn't have to be in classes. So I definitely prefer the online from the flexibility standpoint, but I do think that maybe that left me a little bit exposed in some class structure or some in-class teaching. But
Mhm.
it's a give and take, and at some point you have to make a choice.
Well, let's roll forward. Now you are with Orlando Pride. For listeners, just describe first your role as a sports scientist for this women's professional soccer team, and really give me an idea of what's a work week like for you, including game days.
Yeah, so because it's just kind of me in the department, obviously we hope to fill out a little bit more. I am doing the gym programming and I'm doing the warm-ups for training, anybody that needs top-ups during training. And so I'm kind of running around looking at the iPad, put the iPad down for a while and go coach, and then check the iPad, go coach. So it's kind of a two hats at the same time, and it does get a little stressful, but you just have to stay calm, think about what the end goal is, and figure out the best way to get that through. So a typical week, let's say we just had a game. So you come in, you get a recovery session in for half of the group, and half of the group is outside doing a top up.
What's a top
Yeah.
up?
So a top up is just kind of matching some of the players that didn't play from the game to some
Okay.
stimulus or a load for them. So a lot of small sided games, a lot of rondos, maybe a couple runs in between if they weren't able to get everything post match. So it's just kind of a catch up. Maybe a day off the next day, match day +2. And then when you come in back to work, match day -4, match day -3 and 2. So -4, we might look for some small stuff, small spaces to work in, really get a good metabolic load on the group. And then match day -3 might be a big spaces, big field, lots of high speed running, and that usually is our gym day as well. So make your high days high and your low days low,
Mhm.
essentially. So kind of split between running the field and running the gym, but we get it all in during the week.
So you also are in charge of the strength and conditioning, the weight room stuff as well.
Yeah, so we handle that in the programming, and then anyone coming from rehabs kind of get from athletic trainers to me, and then back into team sessions.
Okay. So we'll get to Orlando City because I know that's where you started. But I guess for someone that is literally thrown in this position, how do they make this that balance to be able to assess the data, decide, okay, who needs what in the weight room? What helped
I would
you?
say if you were thrown in this position without anything beforehand, coach first. You can always look at the data later. I'm able to look at the data real time, which is helpful in some instances, but coach first is the most important thing. So if you have to put the iPad down and just have eyes on what the players are doing, do that first, because that's more important. Then when you get inside, you can reflect and download the session and see what actually happened, and maybe that then you're able to make changes for tomorrow. So that would be my advice, is to coach first and focus on that, deal with the data once you get back inside.
Well, given all of your roles, I'm curious, what's the least glamorous part about your job?
Probably hydration tests, not gonna lie. So you have to get a urination sample, and then you got to test it with the gloves and the USG. So that's probably my least favorite, and definitely one where if I can hand that off to somebody, I try to, but usually it comes back to me.
How often is that?
I do it once a week. So my protocol, or my standard, is match day -2. So that way we have 48 hours to change anything if we need to.
And then you're the same person that sent it out to the lab and all that stuff?
Yep. So input the data after it's in, then make a pretty little report, and then message any players that need some corrections for the next 2 days.
Now, for medical professionals, because there are going to be some physical therapists, athletic trainers who may not have extensive background with strength and conditioning or an understanding of how to really ensure an athlete is peaking, maybe because they don't have strength and conditioning staff at hand, where would you recommend they start to try to gain just a general understanding?
Yeah, the NSCA website has a lot of free information and a lot of good information, and I have quite a few of their books just because it's just really easy to read and they make things simple. So that one is definitely my go-to. Podcasts are great resources. This one, there are plenty of podcasts out there, and in my hour drive to work, I have 2-speed, and you just crank them out.
Name a nice strength and conditioning podcast.
The Pacey Performance one is pretty popular. There's like 300 episodes, so it can keep you pretty involved. And it's again, like this podcast, sports specific or soccer specific usually. So there's a lot of episodes for that. But yeah, and then the biggest thing for the strength conditioning, just keep it simple. You don't have to do the fancy exercises. You don't have to do the fancy power movements. Like push, pull, rotate. Do it fast, do it slow, do it in planes, do it with dumbbells, do it with barbells. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just keep it simple.
Just keep it simple. When did that finally click for you?
I think you go through the process. Like you come out of college, you know everything. We're going to do these cool exercises because I saw them on Instagram. And then the more you learn, it's like you push, you pull, you rotate, you move fast, you move slow, and the players accept it and they understand that, and they're not going to get bored. Like I think we get bored programming exercises, but they don't get bored.
And when it comes to keeping it simple, at least from what you've seen working with professional men's and professional women's soccer team, those players, they have that ability to really stay healthy when it's the right time is right. They're peaking at the right time. What do you notice that they just do so much better, or they pay more attention to throughout the season?
Yeah, I would call those real pros. And I think even at the pro level, yes, we are the professional elite, league for the US. But within that, you still have variations of the ones that are pros, and they get in and do their corrective exercises, and they do treatment before training. They get on the bike before training, so they make sure that they're prepped. There are others who show up for activation, and that's the first time they've moved for the day. And you can kind of tell because they're a little more stiff, not quite ready to go. The ones that consistently take their pre and post supplements, or that are consistently getting Normatec boots or ice baths afterwards, like you kind of take note and you kind of keep a mental check, and then you see which ones consistently feel fine and feel better and which ones are consistently breaking down.
I see. And then from the nutrition aspect, are you also providing recommendations to the players on what they should or should eat, or by now they kind of understand?
I think a little bit. It's still learning. Nutrition is, in my opinion, probably the hardest one to nail down, right? Because so much of that is the athlete on their own figuring it out or cooking for themselves, whereas the strength conditioning program is handed to them. right? It's on the board, you do this exactly. The nutrition piece, we have a dietitian with the club. She works a lot more with the men, but she still helps us and is available to us. She's done a couple of talks for us. She's given us some handouts. So we have, thankfully for us, a full-time person who is readily available to help educate the athlete.
Now, for the men's team, for their sports performance department, they have 4 to your 1. So eventually you said, are they going to hire more people? Because you said it on one of the podcasts that it does get to a point where there's only so much you can do with the time that you have. How soon do you think NWSL clubs will start to invest a little bit more in getting more staff?
Yeah, I think it's close. If not next year, hopefully the year after. That would be my hope, and obviously I think the goal. With talks of a CBA with the players, maybe that's something that they're pushing. I have no idea, but you would hope that people recognize the quality that we can give the players and the athletes would be better if we had more staff. Because like I said before, is I only have so much time in the day. So if I'm doing all these things, then the quality of all those things is going to go down. And maybe that's where you are right now, and you just have to make that sacrifice and understand that. But with the hope that that can change and we can give better service to the players.
Yeah. Now, for a student maybe going through their bachelor's program, exercise science, and they know they want to work for a professional team, I'm curious about your thoughts when it comes to honing their skills, because it seems when you first graduate, it is great to have a general background of sports science. But then as you get further along, I mean, you got a master's in human performance. Is there a time that one should really try to hone in on a specific given skill to make themselves more marketable for a professional club?
Maybe. I think for people in college, you have access to a lot of sports. Go get involved somehow. There's plenty of sports, varsity sports right there for you. So figure out if you can go shadow, go work, go, maybe that leads to a proper internship while you're going through your bachelor's degree. If that's not available, high school programs love to have free help. So I did high school volleyball for 3 years and practiced my skills on them, and they have no idea. They don't know any better. So they don't know that I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm just making it up and smiling as I'm going along. Yeah. So there are ways to find opportunities to coach, and that's the biggest thing, is finding your coaching personality and your coaching voice and figuring out who you are in front of a group of 30 people.
Now, when you say you kind of use your skills with probably not much technology, working with the high school, what did that look like?
Yeah, so the easy answer is go back to session time and RPE. Those two can tell you a lot of information of how the players responded to the session on a RPE scale and how long the session actually was. So those two things can give you a lot of information, and pen and paper works just as well as a computer or an iPad, or your Google Forms are free. You can make a Google form on your iPhone, because we all have smartphones these days. Like, you can get around and make some stuff up and get creative when you have to, and that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned.
Yeah. Now, that perceived exertion chart, is it the one that's from 1 to 10 that you would typically use?
Yeah. So there's been a lot of research on what words to use to go with it. So maybe just stick with 1 to 10 and maybe some colors, right? So you don't have to get too crazy about light, very light, moderately hard. You can just stick to colors and numbers.
Gotcha. And that kind of brings me to the point for even medical professionals who may not have all the high technology. Would you recommend that as a resource? Anything else that they could use to help an athlete ensure that they are still kind of progressing to that end stage of rehab? Because for physical therapists, sure, many, at least in the clinic, they'll see an athlete through their ACL rehab, but we don't get to see them 5, 6, 7 months. What are some things that maybe we could advise an athlete to do, or for some of us that do get to see the athlete for that 6 months, for if insurance covers it, how can we make sure that we're still making sure they're kind of climbing up?
Set goals for the athlete and kind of let them know your progressive timeline. Like, what would you like them to see even after they've left you? Now, if the next clinician takes them in a different direction, well, obviously that's out of your control, but at least the athlete knew that you had an idea for their whole time.
Mm-hmm.
The session RPE is always an easy one to go. Now maybe they're not quite there yet, right? Maybe they're just doing some body weight stuff, or you guys are moving them through different progressions of the knee extension and knee flexion. So you can always go with sets and reps, sets times your reps, and maybe even if you added a 5-pound dumbbell, add that in there as well. So you can get a session load just in a different way. And yeah, it might be light, but they're in the beginning stage of rehab, it should be light. So you can find ways to continue to monitor load even without velocity-based training, or like it can be very simple when needed to be.
Now you handle more of the end stage rehab. Are you in communication with those medical professionals that are focused on obviously the early stage of those injuries as well at your club?
Yeah, so unlike someone maybe that you were talking about before, where the PT might not be covered through insurance and they lose connection with that athlete. Obviously here we have athletic trainer, personal trainer, doctor, and myself who are all working together. So we'll have daily meetings on a person, we'll have monthly meetings on a person who's going through long-term rehab, and we're continually talking. And thankfully with this group and this team, there's no egos. So if I plan something that's too much, then they'll say something and we just move it and change it. What can she do? What can't she do? Then let's continue to push the athlete that's best for her, not because I said she had to back squat or something like that.
And you said you have such a team that works together, you guys collaborate well. What do you think about your team? I mean, clearly you can't have an ego, but how do you think your team's, I guess, collaboration helps you all work so well together? Is there something that you all do differently? Because I think there are some, even clinicians, that may have a strength and conditioning specialist, but sometimes there's this disconnect about, okay, where should an athlete be? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's tough. I think it's personalities. And again, like I said, getting to know your athletes, but you probably should get to know your staff first, right? Like if that's my team is the staff, whereas the players are teammates to each other. I have a team that I'm working with as well. And I need to get to know them and go out for a drink, go out for a coffee, get to know them. So that way, when you get into work in high stress environments, you can do work that's beneficial to the athletes. I think the other thing is just healthy conflict. Like it's okay to disagree. It's okay to say, I don't think that we should do it that way. Now, at some point, you're going to have to make a final decision on what is done as a team and move forward. But it's okay that you don't just agree with the athletic trainer all the time. It's okay that you don't agree with the PT all the time. But at some point, unify and then go to the athlete with the plan going forward.
And you mentioned having a healthy conflict, that being okay. And I think even sometimes you might have this with athletes where they might not be in agreement with what you all have to say. How do you walk that fine line to understand an athlete, where they're coming from, but also still give them what you think would work best for them?
Yeah, it comes through. Sometimes you have those conversations in a one-off passing to training, something like that. Athlete just kind of goes, I'm not doing that, and then just walks away. Or maybe it's in the gym, I'm not doing Nordics, I'm just and they just leave. So you would hope to pull that athlete aside and say, what is the reason why this doesn't want to work for you? Oh, I had a really bad hamstring injury 3 years ago. Okay, I wasn't aware of that, or something, some sort of conversation comes about it later. And then maybe you come up with, hey, let's do RDLs, or let's do hamstring sliders instead. And that works better for you, but we still get that eccentric load. And that's just an example, but you would hope that you kind of let that situation diffuse and then go back to the athlete and have a conversation later.
And does that usually work for all athletes?
Usually, yeah, because they then get to really voice what they're thinking and they get to feel like they're heard. And then as long as you move in a direction there with their input, rather than if I had a conversation with them and then still continued to make them do Nordics, well, then that conversation was pointless. But if have a conversation where I can get the thing that I need, which is just eccentric hamstring load, and they can get the thing that they need in a way that works, then we've both moved forward in a better direction.
I see. Well, on another note, the Olympics just passed and you had a couple players, Alex Morgan, that were at the Olympics. I guess, what is the process like having some of the national team players come back to their team, try to get a baseline of where they're at and deciding, okay, should we do less? Should we do more? What do you have to run through?
Yeah, it's tough. And that it's definitely one that I still haven't really figured out, being in the position that I'm in now. And the Olympics this year was the first time where I have been through a situation where an athlete was gone for 2 months out of the season. And, you know, in a good way, our team was still continuing to train and play. We still had games going on. We're in the middle of our season. So it was almost like they just got loaned out to another team for a little bit to go continue to play. So it wasn't too crazy. I think the biggest thing for us was just that it was Japan and that it was time changes and getting them back ready. Hey, do you need a couple extra days? We don't have to get you into training right away. Do you want a couple of days off? Do you want to just come in and bike flush? Maybe it's an upper body lift. What do you need so that way we can get you back in a safe way? It's just, again, conversations. Like I keep repeating that, but that's the biggest thing. And you kind of talk with the national teams about what they felt and what are their recommendations coming back in from their performance staff. And then you take those with what the athlete has to say as well.
And is it pretty easy to speak with their national team, kind of make those contacts, or can it be tough to really get someone on the phone or get an email response?
It's been pretty easy for me, to be honest. So they're really quick to send out reports as soon as their camp is done. And I try to send them whatever information that they want leading into a camp. So far, I've been lucky to where the national teams that I've had to work with have been very responsive. And I think that we're all in it for that athlete. So we want to make sure that the right people have the information they need.
So far on your journey, because you are, I want to say, is it 4 to 5 years now with Orlando City, what has been most rewarding about this journey?
Probably in a little selfish way, getting to move from intern to coordinator to head of sports science to then head of the women's team. Going from the bottom all the way up through a company has been definitely an extraordinary journey. That is something that I'm very proud of. And I don't know if maybe I should be, but that's something that I keep going back to.
Oh, I would be too. And before you obtained your bachelor's, if you knew that this was a route that you'd have to take, would you have done it again?
I think so. Now, I definitely had no idea that this would happen this early. Like, I know we talked about, you know, not getting a real position until 3 or 4 years after graduating, but I almost feel like I peaked too early. I've gotten to pro sports too soon. Because, you know, it's not for long. Sports and pro sports transition very, very quickly and a lot. So I hope I haven't done this too soon in my career.
And I was just going to ask you that. Is it normal for a sports scientist to literally start working with a professional team? I mean, I don't know too many physical therapists that are working with an MLS or NWSL team, to be quite honest.
Yeah, it's not usual. And I'm very aware of that. And I keep pushing so that way I keep my usefulness around here. But yeah, I definitely am very aware that the jump is not normal. And then staying around for as long as I have is not normal.
What's your end goal?
I would love to stay here. This is my home. This is my home team. Like, I was a fan when they played their first game at Camping World Stadium. I was a fan when the Pride entered the league. So getting to work with the club and the brand is goal, and I hope to stay here as long as I can.
That's awesome. So do you also enjoy traveling with the team?
That's new to me this year, so I'm getting used to that one. The Seattle trip that we just got back from was pretty brutal, but yeah, it hasn't been terrible. Honestly, you leave match day -1, you have the game, and you come back match day +1. So it's pretty quick turnaround. Not terrible.
So when's your day off?
Once a week, maybe, depending on when the game is.
Is today your day off?
No, it was yesterday actually.
Okay, so that makes me feel a lot better.
Yeah.
So this counts as work too.
Yeah.
Well, lastly, just because there are going to be some future sports scientists who may want to be in your position, what do you wish you heard during your time in college to prepare you for the job application process?
I would say that people, and the things that I've started to learn now that I've started to hire interns as well, is from an internship, I'm not looking for that position to come in and run everything. And that's what I was told as well. What we're looking for is people who want to come in and learn and be a help. And that's a big, light flasher to me. Like, that's a person I want to call an interview when they just want to learn, they want the opportunity, they just want to see how it is, see if this is what they want to do, see if they can continue growing. Those are kind of the words and phrases that stick out to me now that I'm on the other side of it.
and that was sports scientist Christi Edson. Now be sure to download, rate, and tell me your thoughts. We'll check you next week.